Welcome to this episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Phil Baty from Times Higher Education. He's a Chief Knowledge Officer. Thanks for joining us, Phil.
It's a pleasure.
So I'd just like to start by asking a little bit about your role as Chief Knowledge Officer. What does that entail exactly?
Well, I've often get criticised for my hilarious job title. I was once the editor-at-large of Times Higher Education. Everyone asked me what that meant. I think people thought it meant I was editor at lunch or editor who was never in the office. Chief Knowledge Officer really is just a way of describing quite a holistic role. I created the World University Rankings, current methodology. So I'm responsible for the editorial interpretation and analysis of all of our world rankings and the development of different rankings. But I'm also responsible for Times Higher Education's communication as well, so the public engagement side and our comms side. And I also have an advisory role in terms of strategy because I've been working at THE for more than 20 years. So right. It's a nice generic job title that kind of covers a range of activities.
Okay. You mentioned that you've been there for nearly 20 years. What attracted you to Times Higher in the first place, and specifically education? Why did you want to have a career in the education space?
Well, funnily enough, actually, the first articles I ever wrote as an aspiring journalist were for Times Higher Education. I was a student journalist, passionate about journalism, really as the sort of good old-fashioned truth-seeking. But the first opportunity I had to write any journalism at all was actually from within the education field. I did a work camp in Israel in the occupied territories, and I was really passionate about communicating other people's stories. So that's where it all started, and I managed, because I'd worked for THE, I got my first job, or my first real job at THE, Times Higher Education. So I was there as a junior reporter. And it just occurred to me very, very early on in my career that I just was so passionate about education. You know, it's transformative. It transformed my life. My opportunity to go to university was hugely transformative to me personally. And then once you're in the sector and you start really appreciating the extraordinary range of public good that universities provide, right through from educating people, but through to solving the world's grand challenges through research, it's just an extraordinary sector to represent. And then as you see it more globally and forming and global higher education becoming more powerful, collaborations and interactions between universities globally, you suddenly realize it's one of the most positive forces for good in the world. So I'm stuck, I'm hooked, I'm here for the long term.
Great, yeah. I mean, certainly, I've been involved in education, with Turnitin for the past 15 years, and I think for me the global remit as well, in terms of having an impact at that scale and improving standards at that scale, is something that still excites me today as well. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and you get the sense that actually the big challenges the world's facing, will be tackled primarily by great academics thinking great thoughts, but particularly through academics collaborating across borders and crossing those cultural divides, transcending geopolitics, you know, to take on the grand challenges, you know, food security, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an incredible sector. We're absolutely extraordinarily privileged to work in it.
Yeah, I agree. So you've launched Times Higher have launched the impact rankings this year. What was the thinking behind that, and what are the key takeaways that you've got from the first set of results, would you say?
Well, the thinking really was recognizing that there are different kinds of excellence in global higher education. So we've produced the World University Rankings since 2004, 15 years. We're on our 16th edition. And that really is a very narrow sense of excellence. It's a traditional sense of excellence. We look at research excellence, we look at prestige, and we do look at the university holistically, but primarily it's going to be the Oxfords and the Harvards and the Stanfords of this world, the Melbournes, the Sydneys, that are really standing out there, very, very research active. They tend to be more wealthy, although of course we are seeing developing countries doing very well. China in particular is rising. Some South African universities doing well, but it tends to be a global north dominated ranking. And obviously the more that's gained influence, it's become the gold standard of what a great research university looks like. We've wanted to try and celebrate and demonstrate that universities are excellent in different ways. It's not all about being rich and having huge endowments or having Nobel Prize winners on campus. It's about the small everyday things, transforming a student's life chances, making your contribution to sustainability through your own stewardship of your own resources, educating or contributing to making the world a better place in terms of health and welfare, but not by curing cancer, but by educating the next generation of nurses and health professionals. So just understanding excellence in different contexts. So we created the impact rankings framed around the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's been incredibly well received. It really has been transformative in terms of universities saying it's a breath of fresh air that, non-traditional universities, in the sense that those that don't always shine out or get recognized in traditional rankings, are able to demonstrate the impact they have on a different set of metrics and a different framework.
Now, of course, you have the impact impact rankings and the world university rankings and a couple of other rankings as well, and you have an awful lot of metrics that go into that. And a lot of people look at these rankings, and people are hired and fired based on them. So it's very important to ensure that the integrity is maintained within those rankings. How seriously do you take that, and how do you ensure that the results have integrity and can't be challenged on that basis?
I guess the results can always be challenged because the methodology is always based on subjective judgment. Mm-hmm. So Times Higher Education, me personally, we've taken responsibility for the metrics we choose and the weightings we give them. So there's always an interpretation issue. Of course, we do that in a very consultative way. When we created the current methodology back in 2010, I almost had a sort of worldwide roadshow of critical analysis and discussion of the methodology. We surveyed users, we published a draft methodology for comment, and we had an expert advisory group. So creating the methodology and developing the method is very collaborative and consultative and very transparent. As a media organization, we openly talk through our processes, but at the end of the day, it's a subjective judgment to say, well, we weight this element in this way, we weight the element in that way. But beyond that, we are incredibly precious about the trust people have in us. As you say, you do see vice chancellor salaries or president salaries pegged to ranking performance. The governing bodies of many universities across the world put Times Higher Education's rankings into the governing KPIs for the whole institution. Students make decisions based on rankings. Academics make career choices that are at least informed by rankings. So our integrity is massively important to us. And of course, we make money from the rankings. Yeah. It's a free process. The universities submit data for free. We publish it all openly for free. But of course, we provide analytic services and consultancy services and interpretation of all the data we have, and it's paid for. So integrity is massively important to us. The trust we have in the sector it's everything about our brand. That's how we are a successful business. I think the most profound element around rankings is that we made a decision a couple of years ago now to have the entire thing externally audited. So we actually brought in PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they have a process where they audit our data handling and data collection, but they also then recreate the rankings independently of us. So they build their own code and they have their own algorithms, and they have all the same inputs as us. And they separately, there's a team that will build the ranking, and they'll only sign it off when they've replicated it and they're able to compare them. So the actual calculations and the data handling is all audited. Beyond that, there is a huge element of trust with the sector. We use a lot of independent data, so we survey academics, and that's very much independent of the universities. We use bibliometric analysis, so we're analyzing 13 million research papers, 70 plus million citations to those papers. That can't really be manipulated by the institutions, but we do actually trust the universities to supply basic information like faculty numbers, income figures, student numbers. And we do have a whole series of checks and balances in place there around, manual auditing, automated auditing if the numbers change from one year to the next. We have a process where universities have to explain and provide evidence. But fundamentally, that part of the ranking is actually based on trust. And we have sanctions if we feel that it's being manipulated or institutions can't explain significant change. We are able to remove people. But I hope we're in a world where integrity is vital. Mm-hmm. So of course we have checks and balances and measures and ultimately the audit. But actually I would like to say to the sector, the only value of this ranking is that if everyone has an honest and clear view of the global picture, and it's in everyone's interests to have an honest picture, and mm-hmm. universities fundamentally are about pursuit of truth. Mm-hmm. So that's a fundamental part of the ranking process.
Okay. Now the reputation survey is a key part of the World University Rankings. How important do you think academic integrity or research integrity are to the reputation of a university? And do you have any opinion as to whether university leaders are putting enough emphasis on that?
I think there's a key element of the ranking, as you say, is the reputation survey. We survey around 10,000 academics every year, and we use United Nations data to make sure it's geographically representative of scholarship around the world, so about 20% from China, et cetera, and we're asking subject specialists. So the idea really is if you're an expert in astrophysics, and we say who's the greatest university, which are the greatest university teams in astrophysics, they'll know based on reading each other's research mm-hmm. and hiring each other's grad students and the environment. So I think in that context, absolutely, if a university team has been found to have been lacking in integrity, there's upsettingly, there are examples of research fraud. The pressure of academics to publish, to make breakthroughs, I think does encourage people perhaps sometimes to cut corners or massage data. Scandals of that nature will resonate dramatically through the communities. And I think we can see that there have been cases where universities' reputation scores have diminished at the time of big academic integrity scandals. So it's very clearly universities will be held to account in our surveys for any lapses of integrity. But I think beyond that, we live in an information age. There's a huge amount of information immediately available on universities around the world. Bad news spreads incredibly rapidly. So, an era of social media, some localized problems of the past do become national or international scandals these days. And I think university leaders have to take this issue very, very seriously. I mean, fundamentally, they need to take it seriously anyway, because scholarship is nothing without integrity. Yeah. But more and more they will be called out and held to account and will suffer as a result of these lapses of integrity.
Okay, great. And then just finally, you've launched the impact rankings now. What do you see as the future of rankings? Where do you want to take it next?
Well, I think speaking of integrity, actually, I think rankings probably will have to be almost turned back on the sector. I think there's the era of people like Times Higher Education sort of declaring, this university is better than that university based on our methodology is kind of moving on. I think we're moving away from that. I think for our perspective, it's really a question of can we collect the data that genuinely reflects universities' own priorities? So rather than some sort of outsider saying, hey, you're better than them, it's almost about creating as many metrics as possible and then holding a mirror up and saying which ones matter to you, which metrics are relevant to your mission, which ones are relevant to your national priorities, your international mission. If you're a research university, we have a wealth of information. If you're a teaching-led institution, we have different metrics. If you're a university committed to social justice, we have different metrics. So I think we get criticized quite a lot for saying, there's more and more rankings. There's the Times Higher World rankings, the teaching rankings, the impact rankings, Latin America rankings, Asia rankings, emerging economy rankings. But we actually say that's healthy because there isn't a right answer. There's no correct ranking. They're all about the interpretation and they're all about the weights and metrics used. So I think really the era now is to say we hand the rankings back to the community and say, look, we'll collect the data, we'll present the data, we'll analyze the data, but more and more we want to give it back to you and allow you to create your own benchmarks, create your own metrics that suit your individual mission.
Okay,
So
interesting.
democratizing rankings and also making them more transparent. So integrity back to the sector. We have all this data, do with it what you will, use it to your own strategic needs.
Okay, so you see yourselves as, like you said, there's more and more data being produced, and the difficulty is, how do you bring all that together and make something meaningful out of it? So you see your role potentially as assisting in that process, saying, okay, this is what collecting that data, we can create these metrics, we can create these guides on what's happening, and then it's up to you to follow whatever you want.
Yeah, we'll consult with the sector to create the ranking, but then we'll also allow the sector to break that all down again. So we'll create these composite scores and pillar metrics based on our interpretation of what the sector tells us they need and what they're interested in. But more and more we'll turn it back around and say, we've built the composites, but you break those composites down, and then create your own profiles and benchmarks against your own peers and your own mission.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. That concludes today's episode of Integrity Matters.